Hey guys, this is Casey Ferris. Thanks for checking out another one of my videos. I really appreciate it. Today we're going to be looking at settings for Protune. If you don't know what Protune is, it's this mode on GoPro that lets you tweak the video settings a little bit more than you normally would be able to. Usually in the video production world, when people think of Protune footage, they think of really flat footage, but there's a few different ways that you can actually shoot in Protune, and they'll all give you different results. And so, being a person who wants to shoot the very best video possible, I went out and shot a few tests because I want to know what are the best Protune settings for somebody who's planning on color grading their footage. And for any of you who are just checking out this video because they want to quickly know the settings and move on with their life, here they are. And for anybody who needs a little bit more detail and really wants to know why I'm saying you should set things this way, we're gonna look at the test footage that I shot and some of the results that I got, so you can make an informed decision like a responsible human being. So the very first thing that I played with was white balance. There's basically three different types of white balance when it comes to GoPros. There's auto, which will automatically set your white balance depending on what you're shooting. There's a Kelvin level setting, which on my GoPro, I had 3000 Kelvin, 5500 Kelvin, and 6500 Kelvin. So you can set that to a constant. So if you're gonna be outside, you can set it to 5500 and it won't change the white balance around. And the third type of white balance is native. Now, as far as I know, on the Hero 4 model, this is called native white balance, but on some of the older models, it's called raw white balance. And I think they are slightly different. I think the camera raw is just what the sensor is seeing and it's not doing any adjustment to the white balance, whereas the native is optimizing it in some way, but it's doing very, very little adjustment to the white balance. But native white balance and camera raw white balance are essentially the same thing. I imagine they changed the name on the later models because there's the format camera raw, which means that it's actually a raw photograph. And so it's totally confusing. I don't know why you would call that white balance, and I guess GoPro might have learned their lesson, but that's just a guess. So here's my white balance findings. First clip is shot with native white balance, and so I'm just gonna load a LUT on here. This is my ground control Protune to 709 LUT. And it does come out a little bit warm, but that's typical of this LUT. It does have a little bit of a warm cast. So I can adjust for it, and that looks pretty good. So I'm gonna grab this effect and copy it, Control C, and I'm gonna switch over to my auto white balance. And as far as the actual white balance goes, that's looking a little pink, and so it's definitely different in between the two. So maybe I'll reset my LUT here. This is definitely giving it a magenta cast with this white balance. So I don't know, maybe something like that. And here we have a semi-decent match, at least on the driveway here. This wood isn't really matching at all. But the white balance isn't terrible. It's not way off. So it's a decent white balance for automatic. And this last clip, I'll copy that same grade onto. This was shot at 5500 Kelvin, which is as close as you can get to sunlight on the GoPros. And I'll reset everything. And this again is decent. It might be a little bit cool. So I'm gonna warm it up a bit. So those are our three different white balance settings. Of course, put through a LUT so we can see what's going on. We have native, which I think looks the best, followed by 5500 Kelvin, which looks a little bit worse, but still pretty good. And then auto, which gives this pink cast that I really don't like. And it seems like it's a little bit hard to get rid of. So I'd say at least for this shot, the winner is native white balance. We also have these shots. This is me spinning around in my driveway on a bright sunny day. And so maybe we'll do this one manually. I'll bring down my blacks, bring up my whites maybe just a little bit, increase my contrast, increase my saturation. And I haven't done any shifting of the white balance and it looks pretty good. It's not too bad. That's decent for sure. Now we'll go to auto white balance and I'll take this same adjustment and paste it on here. And as far as the tint, the actual white balance goes, it's pretty good as well. It's not overly warm or cool, it's about right. Same thing for 5500 Kelvin. That's pretty good. That might be just a little bit cool, which I would expect for setting something at 5500, because remember sunlight is around 5600 or so. So there's our three white balances. Now here's something that I totally didn't expect. I expected the auto to maybe shift around a little bit. I expected the native to maybe not be quite on, but to be constant. And same with the 5500 Kelvin. But something I totally did not see coming is the way that this saturates colors. So check this out. This is the native white balance, and look at the greens and look at the sky. I can boost this saturation quite a bit. I can even go into creative and boost it a little more. And that's about the point where it starts to get crazy, but it still looks pretty uniform. Like, it looks not terrible. And that's native white balance. If I go over to auto white balance, you can see a lot of this is desaturated, but look at these greens and these blues. They're just going nuts. They're going nuts, and I'm not even that saturated. If I start to pump that up and kind of looked at my skin, that's where this blue of this sky just really starts to get unbelievable. Same thing with the 5500 Kelvin. I got a real similar look here. I can turn off all of my saturation, and you can see it's already getting crazy without any boosting of the saturation or anything like that. That's really weird. That's really weird. That's something I didn't expect, and it's honestly one of my pet peeves about GoPros is I don't like this oversaturated blue sky look. I hate that look. So when I see footage that looks like that, I go, oh wow, that was shot on a GoPro, and it just doesn't look super great. So I'll reset this saturation to a tasteful level. So this native white balance definitely has an edge over the other two, not just in setting your color temperature, but it actually gives you less saturation problems, which is something I didn't expect, but something to keep in mind. So as far as white balance goes, I think the winner is native white balance. Here's another really interesting test. I took the GoPro inside. This is a really warm kitchen. It has incandescent lighting. Go over here to the dining area, and we have incandescent lighting above and sunlight coming in the window. And then out to the garage, we have bounced sunlight and then direct sunlight. And so I wanted to see which type of white balance would handle this better. And here's what I found. This first one was shot with native white balance. And if I were to grade this to look decent outside, and then I go back here to the inside, it looks really orange. The reason for that is it's keeping a constant setting on the white balance. And so if I set it good out here, inside where it's a different color temperature, it's obviously going to look different. Now for the auto white balance, it looks really nice in here. And then outside, it looks pretty good too. Of course, we have the crazy saturated sky because it's auto white balance, and apparently that's what it does, at least on my GoPro. So at first glance, you would think, okay, this auto white balance does a good job inside and it does a good job outside. That seems like the way to go. But here's the deal. This first shot that's shot in native looks great outside and doesn't look great inside, but what I can do is do a grade for the inside, and then as I go outside, I can fade it out so that it looks good outside, and that's 2 layers. And of course, this room kind of starts to look crazy. We can play with that a little bit, but for the most part, you can animate your grade and just kind of go in between those pretty easily. As far as the auto white balance goes, if I start here, it looks good. Now I go over here and this looks really weird. So I can do another grade on it to try and make it look decent. And then I'm gonna go outside and, okay, everything's really bluish green. It's weird. And outside it's okay, so maybe I'll do a grade on the outside. So there we go. I have a good looking outside, good looking inside. And the middle is kind of starting to look weird. It looks way too green right there, and so maybe I should move this over. And so it just seems like there's a lot more effort to try and get the same exact result. Even though this shot starts way off, I can grade it and then animate that grade as I go, and it looks pretty good with not much work. Whereas this one looks good here, it looks good here, but in between it takes a lot of work to actually animate that grade because it's always changing that white balance. And that sucks. That's one of those things ain't nobody got time for. So if I were gonna recommend one white balance to pick, I would pick native every single time because that seems like it gives consistent results and better color reproduction in general. The next setting in Protune that I wanna talk about is the color. Should I shoot in flat or should I shoot in GoPro color? So I did a test and here's what I found. This is Protune Flat, and let's look at the information that we captured. So we can see just about everything in the garage, see detail here, we can see detail in the trees, we can see detail over by the houses, and the sky is a little bit bright, but if we take the whites down a little bit And the highlights down a little bit. And although it is pretty bright and some of the detail is clipped out, we do still have detail in the sky. So we have detail in the sky and in the clouds, as well as here in the garage. Now here's GoPro color. GoPro color is just how the GoPro has normally shot color without doing any type of flat profile or log profile, anything like that. It's just normal full range color. So first of all, if we look at the difference here on the scopes, we have info down here at 0 and info up here at 100. And on Protune, we have these blacks a little bit lifted. And so there's plenty of information there, where here we might have some stuff getting clipped out. And so just like before, let's try and bring back the sky a little bit. Let's bring down the whites and the highlights a little bit. And it looks like we do have some detail in the sky that we can recover. And I'd say it's somewhat comparable to the Protune color. It looks like there's a little bit more banding here when it comes to bringing stuff back, but there's kind of banding in both of these. And so it's probably pretty even when it comes to the highlights. Where I think this makes a difference is the shadows. So here in Protune, you can see we have lots of detail here in the garage. I'll go up to 100%. And this one shot with GoPro color. Maybe we can bring some of the shadows up. Maybe bring some of the blacks up. And see what we can see in there. Now here's where the difference comes in. This GoPro color footage with the shadow slider brought up, you can see most of the things in here. We do have quite a bit of detail, but there's also a lot of noise. There's a ton of noise. Here's the noise from the GoPro color, and here's the noise from Flat. They're both pretty noisy and it's pretty comparable detail, but the noise on the GoPro color version is definitely a lot more pronounced and, you know, really kind of that ugly purple blocky noise that is really noticeable, whereas this is much softer noise. So as far as shadow detail, if I were going to pick one, I would definitely pick Flat. That looks like it gives you the best dynamic range, and it's supposed to, so that makes sense. Now I also did this spin around test with GoPro color. So here we have similar results. You see we're crushing out quite a bit. I can bring back some of the shadows and maybe boost up the blacks to get a little bit of detail here in the garage. But in the Flat version, you can see all the detail without making any adjustments, and there's a lot less noise. Now, as far as the highlights, if I were to bring the exposure down, you see I have still pretty good skin detail on my face, losing it a little bit on the arm. But on the GoPro color version, if I take my exposure down just like that, you see it's hard to get that detail back in the face. I do a little bit at some angles, but it's still pretty bright and it's clipping a little bit here. A little bit better skin tones, a little bit better highlight recovery when it comes to Protune Flat. My next test was on sharpness. Now, as a general rule with modern cameras, you want to shoot with the least amount of sharpening added in camera as possible. And that's because you can get better results sharpening later. But just for kicks, I went ahead and shot some tests with the GoPro. And this is with the sharpening at low, and this is at 200%. And now we have medium sharpness and high sharpness. And so here's the difference between high and low, which is going to be the biggest difference. You can see the high is definitely sharper, but it also adds these little halos around things, which doesn't look good. But let's see how they compare to this clip shot with low sharpness when I do some post-sharpening. Now, if you've seen my tutorial on unsharp mask, that's a super pro way to do it, but I'm trying to move quick here, so I'm just going to do the sharpen slider in the creative tab in the Lumetri color panel. So the sharpness boosted about 30 on this first clip, which was shot with low sharpness. Now they look pretty similar, but the one shot with high sharpness has little halos around things. And the one with low sharpness, the halos are not nearly as bad. And if we look at this grain in this wood, it's actually a little bit nicer looking in the low sharpness footage sharpened in post. So as expected, the low sharpness seems to be the winner here. Here's another part of the image. This is low sharpness, post sharpening, and the high sharpening. And here in the high sharpening, we have halos around these little things and the fence is kind of blurry. Whereas in the low sharpening, we don't have as many halos and the fence is a little bit sharper. The rocks seem a little bit sharper, but they also kind of have those little halos around them. And in the low sharpness footage, it's not quite as bad. So sharpness, when it comes to Protune, I would set it to low. Okay, so here's the test you've all been waiting for. Here is non-Protune footage. So this is just regular GoPro with no Protune at all. And here's the Protune version. So they're obviously really different to start out with, but when you grade the Protune version and grade the non-Protune version, you have a little bit more control when it comes to Protune. So you can do things like recover shadows a little better. There's a little bit more detail here in the garage. I'd say the skin tones look a little bit better in Protune. And of course, it depends on how you grade it. But the non-Protune version has the crazy blue sky, which sometimes looks pretty good, but most of the time looks a little bit crazy, makes the greens pretty crazy. And so you have a lot more control of the color reproduction with Protune. So these settings will give you a little bit more of a blank slate when it comes to doing your color grading, and it doesn't lock you into crazy blue sky and green plant life. This shot with no Protune still looks pretty darn good. So if you don't have time to color grade, not a bad option. But if you're not scared of doing a little bit of color work, Protune is the way to go. So once again, here's my recommended settings for shooting with Protune when you're planning on doing color grading later. And if you want help color grading your GoPro footage, I have tons of tutorials on my YouTube channel, so make sure to subscribe. Also, if you're looking to get a leg up on your GoPro grading, check out groundcontrolcolor.com. because we have several Lut Packs that are designed to take your GoPro footage shot with these type of settings and make it look really nice without tons and tons of effort. So if you have a GoPro and like color grading, definitely go ahead and check out Ground Control. And we also have quite a few free LUTs available, including a Protune 2 Rec 709 LUT, which is the LUT that I used earlier. So I hope you guys liked this. I hope it was helpful. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments below. If you like this video, hit the like button. And of course, for more color grading tutorials, post-production tutorials, all of that goodness, hit the subscribe button and it will deliver them to your house through your computer. I'm Casey Ferris. Catch you next time.